Math 3, Unit 2, Section 3. So, prior to this lesson, we had a lot of background information that we went through. Okay, remember here that these are less than, are and statements, and you end up with an equation where it's one statement together, because it's talking about all the values between negative b and b. Okay? Here, this is a great or statement where you end up with one part of the graph or another part of the graph. And so if you want to highlight these just so you can see them better. So our ands are where they're together. It's both of them in the middle. And our ors are where it's on the sides. And you have two separate statements. Okay, we also have special cases, which we talked about. When b is less than 0, what are they actually talking about there? What numbers are less than 0? Negative numbers. So right now, it's saying when you have a negative number, so for instance, this is saying the absolute value of x is less than a negative number. Okay? What that means is a positive is less than a negative. Can a positive ever be less than a negative? No. So that is our no solution. Okay, on this one down here, it's just saying because the absolute value will always give you a positive greater than a negative. Because again, they're talking about when b is less than 0, which is a negative number. Is a positive greater than a negative? So that's where it is all reals or all solutions. All real solutions. Okay. When you're solving inequalities algebraically, you always want to get your absolute value on the left side first. Then you'll rewrite it as your two separate inequalities. Remember how whenever we're writing the negative inequality, what do we do with our inequality sign? You flip it. Okay? Another thing that I want you to remember is that when you multiply or divide by a negative number, what happens? Good. You flip the inequality sign. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and just skip down to our problems now, but there are steps. If you get stuck when you're doing your homework, you can go back and read through those. Okay, so just like yesterday, we're going to do the graphing part, and then we're going to do the algebraic part. Also, I want you to change this to g instead of f. It's supposed to be g of x, not f of x. Okay, so going back here to the graph, we're going to accurately graph these. So starting with f of x. I'm going to highlight my equation for f of x to make sure I don't miss anything, because sometimes we don't see that minus 2 there. For f of x, what is my vertex? Good. 0, negative 2 is correct. Can I use slope for absolute value? Yes. What is my slope for this one? 1 over 1. So remember, if there isn't a number in front of here, there's really a 1, and so 1 over 1. So let's go ahead and plot this. 0, negative 2, make a point. That is my vertex. Should this v be going up or down? Up. So we go up 1, right 1, and then go across our line of symmetry. For these graphs, you definitely want them to be accurate because we're trying to find points of intersection, so you could go up a lot more points if you want to. I would also recommend using some sort of straight edge when you are drawing your lines. Okay, and label that. That is our f of x. Okay, next we have g of x. And my g of x equation is what? Y equals 3. So we just go up to positive 3 on our y-axis, and we are going to draw our line. Also label that as g of x. Okay, any questions to this point? All right, on A here it says highlight the portion of g of x. So we're going to highlight on the g of x line where f of x is greater than g of x. If you're looking at your graphs, do you see how right here, do you see how f of x is above g of x? So that means you would highlight here and here, because that is where the line of f of x is above the g of x line. If they had said highlight where f of x is less than g of x, then we would have highlighted the middle portion, because see how this is below that line? We would have highlighted in the middle. I want you to pay attention here to this and this. Okay, where it starts, and notice how it's highlighting to the right, and here where it starts and it's highlighting to the left. We're going to come over here and solve algebraically now. They are saying f of x is greater than or equal to g of x, just like what we did here. Oh, I forgot. It says state the interval along the x-axis. So, how would I write this in interval notation with our brackets and parentheses? So this is negative infinity all the way to what? Negative 5. And then it's at 5, and it goes to positive infinity. Okay. We're going to plug in what f of x is. What does f of x equal? Absolute value of x minus 2, correct? This is f of x right here. Is greater than g of x. What is my value for g of x? 3. Is the absolute value by itself? No. It has this minus 2 here. How do we get the absolute value by itself? Add 2 to both sides. Good. Absolute value of x is greater than 5. Based on what we've learned, great or means we're going to have 2 statements. If you needed to, this is a greater than sign. I go up here to this chart. Okay? See here it's greater than. I'm going to write 2 equations. Okay? So for this problem, we are going to have x is greater than 5, and the other equation is going to be what? X is less than negative 5. Because we already learned how anytime we have a negative, we flip that inequality sign. Okay? If you are graphing this on a number line, here is negative 5, here is 5. X is greater than 5. Go to the right. X is less than negative 5. It would go to the left. Do you see this graph and this graph? Do they match? Okay, we've already written this in interval notation. Would you agree that this interval notation would match this one? Okay, and then inequality notation is just like this. We're saying x is greater than 5 or x is less than negative 5. Okay, any questions? Let's do another one. We're going to graph first. Okay, first graph. F of x equals negative 3. What does that mean to me? What would I write? Y equals negative 3. We're going to go over here. We're going to go to negative 3, and we are going to draw that line, and we're going to label it as f of x. Next, we have our g of x equation. What is my vertex for g of x? -4, 0. What is my slope? -1 over 1. Okay, so -4, 0. We go left, 1, 2, 3, 4, up 0. Make our point. And is this going to be going down or up? Down. How do you know that? The slope is negative, okay? So we go down 1, right 1, and then across our line of symmetry to make our other point. And then we can do the other points, and we can draw our linear absolute value. Hopefully you can draw better than me. Okay, and we're going to label that as g of x. Okay, again, we want to notice our points of intersection. So this one says, highlight the portion of f of x. So again, we're highlighting this straight line right here, where g of x is greater than f of x. So where is g of x above f of x? Is it on the sides or is it in the middle? So this is g of x, correct? Looking at this line, do you see this is where it's above? So when it's saying greater, you're trying to find the portion that's above the line. When it's saying less than, you're trying to find the portion that's below. So on this one, you would highlight right here. This is where g of x is above that line. How would I write that in interval notation? This highlighted portion, how do we write that? Bracket. What value is it here for the domain? -7 all the way to -1 and a bracket because of the equal to sign. And the inequality equal to sign. Brackets. Ask me a question, Lily. Do you have a question? Okay. So we are doing, when you're writing your intervals, it's your domain. Do you see how this domain is at -7 here? The highlighted portion, we're just looking at the highlighted portion, -7 to -1 on your domain. Better? Okay, we're going to solve it algebraically. What am I going to write for g of x? Absolute value of x plus 4, negative absolute value of x plus 4 is greater than or equal to -3. What do we do when we have a negative in front of the absolute value? Divide by -1 to both sides. What happens when you divide by a negative when you're dealing with inequalities? You flip the sign. So we have x plus 4, absolute value of x plus 4 is less than or equal to +3. A negative divided by negative makes a positive. Okay? We're going to make our two equations. The first equation is the same as that, without the absolute values. X plus 4 is less than or equal to 3. What is the other equation? Perfect. X plus 4 is greater than or equal to -3, and then we solve. We subtract 4 to both sides. X is less than or equal to -1. Over here, we subtract 4 to both sides. We get x is greater than or equal to -7. When you're graphing this on a number line, -7 is on the left, -1 is on the right. Okay? At -1, it's a closed circle and it's the values going less than, which is to the left. At -7, it's a closed circle and it's the values going to the right, and it's the and is where they overlap. Do you see how they're overlapping in the middle? you can't decide if it's like an and or problem until the absolute value is by itself. Do you see here how you end up with this symbol? And we know that's an and. It's always the overlapping portion in the middle. Do you want to ask me any questions? Okay, we're going to turn to the back. Okay. These, we are just going to solve them. Okay? Once your absolute value is by itself, you set up your two equations. Okay? One will be 3x minus 9 is less than 12. The other one will be what? Perfect. 3x minus 9 is greater than negative 12, and we are going to simplify both of them. Add 9 to both sides. 3x is less than, what's 12 plus 9? 21. And then we divide by 3, and we get x is less than 7. On the other side, I add 9 to both sides. We have 3x is greater than, and what's negative 12 plus 9? Negative 3. Divide both sides by 3, and we get x is greater than what? Negative 1. So, if you are graphing this, negative 1's on the left, 7's on the right. At negative 1, it's going to the right. X is greater than negative 1. At 7, it's saying x is less than 7. It's going to the left. Do you see how this was a less than, an and, which means that it should be overlapping in the middle? Okay? They ask us to write our answers in interval notation. How would I write this answer? Parenthesis or bracket? Parenthesis, negative 1 to 7, parenthesis. Why is it a parenthesis and not a bracket? There's no equal to sign. Okay. Is this absolute value by itself? No. Add 1 to both sides. Absolute value of 3/4 x is greater than or equal to 6. What do you think this graph is going to look like? Is it going to be overlapping in the middle, or is it going to be one on each side? Because this is a great or. Remember, if you look around at all the graphs we talked about today, this symbol is or, where you have two separate pieces. This one is and, where you have some overlapping in the middle. Okay, we write our two equations. What are my two equations for this one? 3/4 x is greater than or equal to 6. The other one is? Perfect. Oh, sorry. How do you get rid of that fraction? By the reciprocal. You're multiplying by 4/3. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. Remember that 6 can be written as a fraction by putting it over 1. These eliminate. X is greater than or equal to, and how does this simplify? 8 is correct. You can do it different ways. I'm going to reduce 3 and goes into 6 2 times, and 2 times 4 makes 8. We do the same thing over here. We multiply by 4/3. And we simplify that, and this one ends up becoming what? Negative 8. X is less than or equal to negative 8. When you go to graph this, negative 8's on the left, Positive 8 is on the right. Greater than or equal to 8 would be solid, going to the right. Less than or equal to negative 8 would be okay. How do I write that in interval notation? Starting here, if it's going this direction, that's what? Negative infinity to negative 8. Bracket because of the bracket because it's negative, or it's solid, right? Okay, U, and then a bracket, and it's 8 to positive infinity. This is an 8. Or I mean a negative 8. Okay. Any questions? Okay, what am I going to do on this one? How do I get rid of that negative 2/3? Multiply by the reciprocal, and it's going to be negative 3/2. Okay, that eliminates everything. We have the absolute value of 3x plus 1. What happens when you multiply or divide by a negative? You have to flip that. So we get less than. And then what does that reduce to become? Negative 9. The nice thing about when we get negatives is we know that there are only two possible answers. Either all solutions or no solutions, right? So absolute value always makes a what type of number? Positive. A positive is less than a negative. Is that ever going to be true? Therefore, the answer is woohoo! Done. Okay. Do you guys feel like we need to do this example? No. Okay, skipping it. Moving on. What are we going to do first here? You want to get this by itself, correct? The f of g of x by itself? Yeah. So I will do what first? Subtract 2. F of g of x is less than or equal to negative 7 minus 2 is what? Negative 9. Okay, now that this is by itself, we're going to substitute in. What will I substitute in first? Good. The g of x part, which is x plus 3. F of x plus 3 is less than or equal to negative 9. Now what? Good. We're going to plug it into the f portion, correct? So if this is x, instead of writing x, we have to write? Good. So absolute value of x plus 3 is less than or equal to negative 9. When it equals a negative and the absolute value is by itself, I'm like, oh, good. It's either going to be all solutions or no solutions. Absolute value always becomes positive. Is a positive less than or equal to a negative? Is that true or false? No. Only if you multiply or divide by a negative. So adding and subtracting, you're good. So this one's what? No solution again. Okay. Any questions here? Am I going too fast? Okay. One more here and then a word problem and we're done. Okay? So, highlight this whole thing to make sure you don't miss part of the problem. Okay? We need to get the f of g of x by itself. What would you do first on this one? Okay, get that by itself. See if you can set up the whole equation. Why are you smiling? Just kidding. Okay, can somebody come up here and get f of g of x all by itself for me, for candy? Anybody need candy? All you have to do is do that first portion, get f of g of x by itself. Thank you. Hold up. Good. So the first thing, you can divide by -3, but you'd have to divide every single term, including the 12 and the 9. So I might, if you want to first subtract 12 to both sides.
Okay.
So it's kind of like backwards order of operations. But yeah, get rid of your adding and subtracting first, and so then we rewrite it. So -12 to both sides. So by the 9. So we're going to do -12 here, -12 by the 9. Good. Okay, so then draw your line. Okay, and so we're left with -3 f of g of x. The 12 and the -12 cancel out, right? And we have greater than 9 minus 12 is -3. Good. Okay. Good job. Okay, so now we're going to divide both sides by -3. Keep going.
Yeah.
Wait, did you change the symbol?
Not yet, because we just subtracted 12.
Oh, yeah.
So adding and subtracting, you don't change anything. But now that we're dividing by a -3, when we write this, it's going to be f of g of x. And we're going to do what with the sign? Flip it. So it's going to end up being less than, and then -3 divided by -3 is +1. Where did I leave your candy? Oh, grab your candy. On your way back. Good job. Thank you very much. Okay, now what? What's next? Does somebody else want to come up and do the next part? Carrie, you want to come up? Okay, come on up. So we're substituting in, right? We're substituting in. You always start with the inside first. So we're going to substitute in for g of x. And so when we do that, we get f of 2x plus 5 is still less than 1. And then now that we have that, we're taking our 2x plus 5 and plugging into our f equation, which makes it the absolute value of 2x plus 5 is less than 1. Perfect. Thank you. Grab your candy on your way back. Okay, now, what does it mean, less than? What type of graph? Are we going to have two separate graphs or a graph in the middle? The graph in the middle. Less than is the and. It's overlapping in the middle. Okay? What we have to write, two separate equations. Okay? So our two separate equations are 2x plus 5 is less than 1. And the other one will be what? 2x plus 5 is greater than -1 is correct. Subtract 5 to both sides. 2x is less than -4. Divide by 2. X is less than -2. Did I just go way too fast? Over here, subtract 5. 2x is greater than -6. Divide by 2. X is greater than -3. Which one's smaller? -2 or -3? -3 on the left, -2 on the right. Would these be open or closed circles? Open. And then where should it be filled in? In the middle. And does that make sense? -2, it's going to the left. At -3, it's going to the right. Okay? Interval notation, how would I write that? Parenthesis, -3, -2, parenthesis. Okay. Questions? Yes?
Why would you divide them? Couldn't you just like...
Right here, you mean?
Yeah.
So you're trying to get the f of g of x by itself. So because there was a -3 in front of it, we want to get that by itself, so we divide by -3, which is why we flipped the sign and it became 1. -3 divided by -3 is 1. Does that answer your question? Okay, anything else? Okay. Last page, right here. Here we go. This is one problem. Okay, it looks scary, but it's not. Okay. So, do we have any readers in our class? Nick wants 3? I just was asking. They made it sound like you wanted to. Okay. A surf shop carries longboards that are from 98 to 40 inches long. Or, sorry, 98 to 140 inches long. Okay? I like to highlight important information. So, could the surfboards be 90 inches? Sorry, longboards. Could the longboards be 90 inches long?
No.
No. Where are they going to be between?
98.
Can you guys visualize this on a graph right now?
Yeah.
What would it look like?
The one that
It would be something like this in the middle where you'd have 98 and you'd have 140, and it could be any size in between those two values. Can you guys see that? Okay. Now, it says, for a beginner surfer using a longboard, it is recommended that the length of the board in inches be 7/4 times the person's height, which is h. Okay. Write a compound inequality. So you know all those things where we're writing them in the middle? That's a compound inequality. Okay? How do you think we're going to write that? What's going to go on the two sides? Okay, so 98 is going to go on one side and 140 is going to go on the other. And then what two signs do we always use when we have our inequalities here? Less than or equal to and less than or equal to, and we're going to have something in the middle. Does everybody agree with this? What do you think is going to be in the middle? H is correct, but there should be something else with that. 7/4 H. Or you could write 7/4 times H. Does this make sense? Yeah? Okay. So now it says solve the compound inequality from part A. There's two ways of solving this. I'm going to show you the way that we basically have been doing this today. Okay? This right here is one equation. That would be written as 7/4 H. Do you see how the open part is going to the 7/4? The open part's going to this. You keep the open part to that. Okay? The other equation would be right here, and we would write that as 7/4 H is less than or equal to 140. Yeah? Okay, how do I get rid of 7/4? Good. Multiply by 4/7. These eliminate. H is greater than or equal to. Can 7 go into 98? Okay, so you could do that. Or you could multiply 98 times 4 and then divide by 7. But 7 does go into 98 14 times. And 14 times 4? Close. 56. Okay, over here we're going to multiply by 4/7. The reciprocal, these eliminate. H is less than or equal to. Can 7 go into 140? You guys can do that one in your head. And how many times? Good job. And 20 times 4 is? 80. Okay, graph the solution set to part B on this number line. Which number should go on the left? 56. Which one should go on the right? 80. And where should it be graphed? In the middle. Yes, question. Why do you think the signs are different? And let's just talk about this too. 56, this is filled in going to the right, and this is filled in going to the left. You know how normally when we set up our equations, we had like a negative and a positive number, but we always flip the sign when you're doing the other one. Yeah. Yes.
Are you supposed to switch it? Multiply it? Oh, then
When you know how normally we have one equation with absolute values, and that's when we're flipping it. Do you see any absolute values here? Nope. So you don't have to worry about flipping anything. We just wrote our two equations. Okay?
And then only flip it, when it's negative?
Yes. When you're doing the negative, the opposite side. Yes. Okay. So the question now is, what is the height of the shortest person that the surf shop carries longboards for? The correct answer is 56 inches. Okay? Now, do you guys normally say how tall you are in inches? No. Okay? So, how could I convert this into feet and inches? Divide by 12. Okay? 12 goes into 56. How many times? 4 times. 12 times 4 is?
48.
Subtract, and there is 8 left over. So this would be 4 feet, 8 inches. Okay, questions?
Yeah, that was